Side or east side?
Yes, on the west side. My wife and I moved to High Park from Royal York and Bloor
Oh, I
when
used
we
to
were.
live in that area.
Yeah, High Park is beautiful, and
Yeah.
it's gorgeous. The park is great. It's great for running, and sort of the shops are great, and
Yeah.
we love it. You're the East End, aren't you?
Yeah, we're in the East End. I was just kind of curious to see if it was snowing where you were because we just finished here. But welcome everybody who's coming on in. We're just gonna get
Welcome.
we're Phil and I are talking about the weather. It's such a great thing to do, right? So welcome. Come on in if you want to drop a hello in the chat and just let us know where are you coming in from? Are you in Toronto? Or are you somewhere else? Would love to kind of hear if you're it's I don't know, it feels like we finally got winter. I don't
I
know.
know, I know. Is that a good thing for you, or is it sort of, hey, I can't
Well, I
wait till
would
I
say
get to.
it used to be. I mean, because we used to like, I mean, we're skiers. So family day, we would always be up in Quebec skiing. This year, not so much, right? So yeah, I don't know. How about yourself? Are you a winter person?
No, really, it's summer, spring, and fall for me, and and I think it's just because you're outside, more people are outside, and it's more social.
Mm,
Uh, but no, yeah, it's I think any time is great when you always have the change of the seasons, so that's been
yeah.
good. But this would be my least favorite because I think it's the one I stay in the most, whereas I'd much rather be outside and connecting.
I know, me too. I mean, we got our daughter into skiing, so that like really got us out and about. And my husband, after never skiing, decided he was going to become a snowboarder. So
Oh wow, how cool! That's great.
well, it is, yeah. It is, except, it's a little hard to snowboard. I don't know. So we got
I've
people
never
from
done it.
Oshawa. Oshawa is in the house,
Oh
and
yeah, New
New
Jersey.
Jersey's in the house.
Oh,
That's
fantastic, Linda.
Milton.
Hi.
So it's an international call already. I love it. Yeah,
Now, when you were skiing, have you ever been sort of compelled with your daughter and your husband to go on the black diamonds or double
no,
black
I got on
diamond?
the Black Diamond once by accident. It was a disaster, and I got yelled at by the ski patroller to stop pizzaing down the hill.
Oh
So
no.
yeah, it's not pretty. I am not a very good skier. I took it up when I was in my mid 20s. So I just I'm pretty much on the greens. I can sort of do the blues, but that's about it. So anyway.
Oh, good for you. When our kids were young, they say, "Hey, let's do it, let's do it." So we kept on going on more aggressive and aggressive on slopes until finally we kind of hit our Waterloo, and it was in a treed area, and we're zooming down, falling all the time until it looked like there was sort of a bear den that was there, and
Okay.
it was getting dark, and we called it our Sterling moment because it was Sterling Mountain in Vermont, and it was like nobody knows we're here. It looks like there's a bear sleeping over
Yeah.
here. Maybe we've gone too far.
Let's move along. All right. Well, listen, everybody, thanks so much for being with us today. We are going to get the show on the road. And oh, we've got somebody from Nigeria. I love
Oh,
that.
wow.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. So welcome, welcome. We are going to be keeping the lines muted, but that does not stop you from putting things in the chat as we go along, put in your questions. So here's our format for today. Phil and I are gonna, get the ball rolling. I've got some questions for him, and but you guys, I always think with these things, those of you who are maybe familiar with Clubhouse and the big frenzy that Clubhouse is calling, think of this as your Clubhouse. We're all in Clubhouse right now, and you get to ask Phil whatever you would like to ask him. It is certainly interesting times we are living in, and so anything that we can do to help you sort of navigate through whatever it is that you're having to navigate through, that is what we are here to do. So Phil, let's get it going. And I know I don't read bios or anything like that. But I want to kind of set the stage. You are the change guru in my life. I'm curious, how did you get into this work? Give everybody what brought you into the field of change and why you're so passionate about it.
Yeah, I got into change, and I think a lot of people get into change. Almost they fall into it with their first sort of role, like you've been nominated to get into something, and then all of a sudden you're the change manager. But my first experience and what drew me to it is I was in training and development, like you have done and
Mm,
others have done. And I was facilitating a workshop on merchandising. So it was Polaroid. And in that time, Polaroid was a big company, a big retail presence, And we were doing this fun exercise where people were spending money in a grocery store on different merchandising activities. And it was fun. It was like dialing for dollars, everyone's jumping in. And I was looking around going, this is great. And then I saw this woman and she had this look of horror on her face, absolute fear. And I got it. And what had happened is we had just come from an activity that was more technology focused, the handhelds that they actually do recording in grocery stores and retail. She had struggled with it, but I didn't realize the personal fear that she had about the fact that she couldn't manage it and what was going on in her head. So I went over and we chatted, and I offered my help sort of after the session so that she could get up to speed. Uh, and she did really well. But from that moment where that fear, when you're caught and you don't know what to do, and I thought that was sort of the ultimate sort of help that you can provide people when they need it the most. And then I was in, and that's been 25 years of that has been sort of propelling me and giving me passion. How do you help people when they don't know what to do with new things and they need to excel and be their best? And that's what I've been, attempting to do. And it still gives me passion to the day.
Well, I love it. And you're about to release your second book. Your first book, Change with Confidence, I remember when that came out. I loved it because I am a sucker for practical. And what I loved about that book was you had it jammed with all these practical templates and tools and things that people could just put into play right away. Now, your second book, which I got a sneak preview of, Change on the Run. And of course, you hooked me in the first chapter where you're quoting David Lee Roth, and the Van Halen. But what I love about this, and I want to give people kind of just a sneak preview. Hopefully you can see in my camera. But you guys, look at how simple this book is, and it's all jammed with really actionable pieces. So tell me a little bit about why you decided to kind of go this route. It's a really different setup and I love it. So what was sort of your thinking behind that?
Well, 3 years ago, I had that feeling to say, just, like you, Glenn, with your books, you get sort of the need is it's time to put pen to paper. And I really want to share what I've learned with different clients from around the world. And then at that point, though, change was becoming more and more a part of people's lives, more changes, the velocity, the amount of change. So things were a little bit more intense than at the time where I wrote Change with Confidence. And then also there was more and more stats coming out that saying, although people buy business books, very few of them read them. There was one stat that said, 20 to 40% of the books that you buy, you read. Another one saying you don't get past the first chapter because you're too busy. And Josh Bershwin said, people spend about 25 minutes a week on personal development and on sort of educating themselves. And why? Because they're too busy. They're too overwhelmed with what they needed to do. So it was a bit of a conundrum for me. Well, how do you write a book that people will actually be able to use when most people have no time to read? And actually my working subtitle at the time was, change management, for people who have no time to read change management books. And because we're too busy. And typically when someone's thrown on a change and they have a change role, they're either doing their day job and they've been given this extra task, or they're seconded to a big change project and they're going night and day. And the velocity of what has to be done on a timeline is crazy. So what I thought is, well, what can I give people based on my experience that will help them out? And typically, when you're on a change project, a lot of the things you uncover is your skills that you've developed over the years aren't necessarily transferable, because you could have been an expert marketer, but now you're in a project management environment and it might not translate well. So I thought, well, there are patterns in life, and there's certain things that people uncover or they're faced with in any large change. And that would be an example of really trying to help leaders be their best, or, presenting to a leadership team. So if I could find those ones that were the big ones that would help people out, and if I could give them one thing that they could do, because they have no time to do three things. They've got no time to think about theory and, well, maybe I could do this or that. But if I could give them the 20% rule that if they could only follow that action, they'd be fine, then they would be ahead and they could continue on. So that became the premise of the book, that I'll give you one action for this situation. Don't think about anything else. Do it. You get 80% of the results in 20% of the time. and there's no perfect in change anyway, and just move on to the other 80 things you have on your to-do list.
I love that. And it reminds me a lot, actually, one of my favorite books of all time is a book called Unstuck. Do you know that book by,
Yes, yes, it's
yeah,
great.
and that's what I loved about that was that book would let you see where are you stuck in your organization. And then you could kind of dive into whatever chapter you needed. And there was these really great strategies to get you unstuck. And that is really what you've done here. And you've got the book divided into, three main parts. So, right. So there's managing me, managing the work, and then managing others. And the managing me part, I thought, boy, but that's really often the linchpin thing when we're in change. Like I always like to say, I like change, I embrace change. And I realize, yeah, it's kind of when I'm the one inflicting the change on other people. I like driving the change. But you have all these great strategies for, how to manage yourself in that. I know one of the ones that resonated for me was the idea of having to stay calm under pressure, right? I tend to be a bit reactive and that type of thing. I'm curious for you as the change guru and in your own managing change, what have you had to sort of work on within yourself? And if there was some kind of linchpinny place for that most people need to look when it comes to managing themselves and change, is there any patterns you've kind of seen with people? Curious.
Yes, certainly. Well, the one that I think is the strength that I would have would be setting goals, because I think in change you can be all over the place, there's so
Mm,
many different people with so many different needs, just really being focused on it. So that would be great. The one I've struggled with is the taking criticism well. Because my learning style is all about, once I think I've got the answer, I've solved the puzzle, the step by step, that's the one that, it's really hard when people say, well, hold it, what about this, or have you considered this? And so I've worked on that, whereas now I've tried to make it something that I lead forward, that, the
mm,
realization is that people have so much to offer and so much to um, complement the work that you're doing, that we are better as a team than as an individual. So that would be the one that I find now, is that really interpretation of, when people actually are asking you questions or whatever, this is all great information to make us successful. But the one I think that would be, the most helpful, if someone's listening right now, they're on a change, and they're sort of almost, instead of driving the car is driving you, because that's the velocity of change. Like there's a
mm,
project team, and you're kind
yeah.
of whisked down down the highway, and you're just kind of looking at the controls and saying, like, how do I
Where
work
are
this?
we?
Yeah, let me off this crazy thing. And so what I'd suggest for that one is really taking stock of your strengths right now, before you go into it, because again, that velocity throws you off and you're not at your
Mm,
best. But I found with everyone, they've got their strengths, they've done well in the past, whether it's in your private or public life, you have done well. But really code it and say, hey, I'm great as a connector, because when there's different groups and they're not getting along, but I'm that person that can
mm,
harmonize them so that we can all go together. Or I'm a great planner, or I'm a big I'm a big coordinator, so I'm enabling people to be their best. Whatever it is, if you lean on your strengths, it'll give you confidence, and you will be at your best, and you'll be the most successful that you can be.
So, to kind of build on this conversation, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, is this notion that, like, right now, and we talked about this in our pre-call last week a little bit, like right now, we're all leading in a pandemic. That is a massive change, right? That has been forced upon all of us. We've all had to kind of adjust the approach. And one of the things that we're seeing a lot of is pandemic fatigue. And there was an article that we were kind of sharing around in our group that, how do you lead your team, motivate your team when you're exhausted, right? And so I've been thinking a little bit this in those of us that are not only leading change in our organization, but also dealing with this change and this managing of self when we're in this very exceptional type of circumstance. Is there anything that you're noticing in your work, and anything that's important that for those folks that are listening to think about, that's kind of an extra layer that's happening right here, right now, given where we're at?
Yes, there is. And I think what we're finding is that that extra layer, but it's also, it's a business component and a personal component. And as you say,
Mhm.
people are exhausted. the transition between personal life and work life is completely blurred. Every day seems like it's Groundhog Day. There's no sort of highs and lows, but we're just sort of there. And I think the one for me is that there's also a greater incidence of loneliness. If you've ever felt that, like you're at your screen again, and you don't have that connection of, people in the lunchroom or whatever. So I think when all of that compounds right now, to step back and if we can ask ourselves, well, what can we do in this situation when our environment is really controlling us? And the message I have for managers is I think that how do you set people up for success when they're constrained by just what we're doing right now? And the challenges too is, at the end of the year, we thought, the end of 2020, goodbye, it's done. 2021, woo, it's great. And it was like day 3, and it's like,
I know, what a lunch bag letdown that.
man, it looks like 2020 to me. And I think that has thrown people for a loop as well, for that the expectation was, hey, it's going to be better. And now it's not. And again, I think the media does a great job of being really clear about the threats and the dangers that are out there. The challenge with getting the truth or getting sort of a greater perspective is it can be really depressing too. Well, what about the variants? Will this work? Not? And we're in this limbo, suspended animation of, I don't know when we'll be back to some semblance of normal or a new view that's better than today. So for the manager, what I would suggest is, given everyone, including ourselves, are like that, there's 3 things I think would be really helpful. One, be really clear on expectations. What is the expectation? What are we looking for? And again, I think we've proven, and leaders have done an amazing job transferring their people to, shelter at home and working from home. And so full props for that. But it's so much easier when you're not in the same room to have misunderstandings, have confusion. Well, I thought you wanted this. Well, what about that? So be really clear on the outcomes and less clear on what I want you to do to get there, because when we're empowered, we feel stronger and we feel like we're at our best. So one is be really clear about those expectations. The second one I would say is about engagement. And the thing is, it's so easy to be distracted when we're at home. And you mentioned Clubhouse. My personal mission is I'm holding off, and it's killing me because it's shiny and it's amazing. And I just want to be on a chat but I'm not, because I know that I've got to focus on, the book and getting things out and supporting my clients. So what I would say is to help people to get engaged in the things that will give them meaning and give them purpose. And there's nothing better, Glenn, if you'd agree, but when you feel like you have purpose in the work that you're doing, that it's connecting with your values and your mission, and you're supporting the mission of your organization, that is kind of, I think for me, the best that you can be. And that there's an energy in there too, that when you do feel that you're doing meaningful work, that you almost have that little bit of extra energy to get you through these tough times. And then the last one would be collaboration. And again, it's harder, there's no water cooler, metaphorical water cooler that we can have, but there's so many great examples of great leaders that are doing their best to connect everyone. Because when we connect everyone, we get help from others, and we get sympathy and empathy, and we're fortified by other people's experiences, and we can ask for help. So that's another thing I think we could do is, so in summary, it is what it is right now, but there's things that we can do. And I think the foundation idea is, when we're doing something in action, we're strong. When we're doing something that we're sitting back and going, oh my goodness, when is this ever going to end? It's typically a stationary part, and it's no fun. So that would be my hope and aspiration for managers as well as for ourselves. So how do I collaborate with others? How do I find meaning in the work that I'm doing? And then how do I make sure that I focus on the outcomes that will make me successful as well as the organization I work for? And if we do those 3 things, I think we've got a better shot at getting to the next sort of phase and being our best, as we do so, which is, I think, what we're all trying to do.
Yeah, and I think being really attuned to your energy is what you make me think of, right? So I think, when you talk about Clubhouse and that shiny object
I
thing,
want
you know,
it.
and I'm one of those people who has like such extreme FOMO if I'm not involved in something. And it's funny. So my like right away, I was with a friend and we're like, okay, we're going to host a room a week. And last week I'm like, oh my God, the last thing I want to be doing is this crazy Clubhouse room. And I really realized that you do have to watch your own energy. And what I loved about the book is where you really talk about like understand your strengths. I mean, we have that in our program too. We make it, get all leaders to think about their strengths. But I'm always saying to people, always know your strength is always your biggest liability. Because when you overuse it, it's going to be a liability. So that is what I will always get myself into trouble is my creativity, my innovation energy, my need for new will also then create work that I'm throwing on my plate, stretching myself too thin, all of those types of things that happen. And I do think it's a great reminder. I love this sort of view of like step back, take stock. All pressure is internal. So if you are in this mode right now, what are you actually inflicting on yourself that you could let go of? What are the standards you're placing on yourself? And I actually really think that about expectations. I'll often see people, they carry much higher expectations on themselves than their managers do. Right. And so this idea of, just stepping back and checking rather than being in, like, often we get so in the fray.
So true. And I think if we can give ourselves a little permission to not be perfect, and a
Mm.
lot of us were brought up to be perfect, or our schooling or our bosses or whomever, our parents. And there is no perfect, especially now with the environment we're in and how much change we're going through. And a lot of my stress comes from unrealistic expectations of myself. And
Mhm.
as you say, and to step back. And one of the things I try to do for me is and I think it can be helpful for a lot of people in saying, well, what advice would you give to someone else? And just follow that, because we're too close to ourselves and the emotions that we exude
Yeah.
that sometimes it is hard to take our own advice, but that always works for me. Okay, Phil, what would you recommend? Okay, do this. Okay, just do that and you'll be fine.
No, so true. If only we would listen to our own best advice. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about one of the things that I have always found interesting in organizations is, dealing with blockers. Like I feel like that is often a common challenge for anybody trying to lead some sort of change. And even right now on a macro level, I know there's a lot of people that, they've got maybe their senior team that's wanting to go back into the office as soon as possible, and meanwhile other people are going, well, wait a second, we want to look at something different. So we can have it at big macro levels or within a project itself. But talk to us a little bit about how do you get over those blockers? What do you do, to kind of bring people along on the journey of change?
Yes, no, so true. And what a great example about let's bring everyone back quickly as an example of or not. And what I found is the first step is assume that we'll always have blockers, and blockers are people that don't want to follow what you're recommending, either because they don't agree with it or they think it will adversely impact them. And earlier in my career, when I saw and it kind of connects to how do you deal with criticism for me, but I said a blocker is my enemy. Like this person's stopping me from getting, and years and years and years ago, I evolved from that view. And what I find is you'll always have blockers. There'll always be people that don't support what you want to do. And what I realized though is that they're blocking you for a reason. And it's not a reason because they want to make sure that you're not successful. There's something going on there. And when I realized is that, first of all, why are they blocking you? Which is something that I wouldn't have asked. I would have just started doing tactics and trying to dance and get it through. But what's the reason behind it? And once years ago, I was in the UK, and I was sort of coordinating a sales council, and I was leading sales and marketing HR at the time. And there was this one initiative, and this man wouldn't follow. Like he just would not do it. And every time, every dance move that I tried, including disco and David Lee Roth kicks, did not work. And I was exasperated, and I had nowhere to go with my limited belief. And I think from there, and kind of out of the ashes, I kind of realized, well, why don't I ask him the challenge is, and what had happened is he had no resources. This was going to be a major drain on him. He had way too much going on. He was behind in his numbers. There was just no way he was going to support this. So we had a great conversation where I said, well, how could we change this initiative so that it would help you and your agenda? And we actually made some fundamental shifts to it that still achieved my outcome, which was sort of a global alignment on something, but fundamentally changed some of those pillars where he couldn't support. And from that moment, now when I look at blockers, and my advice to people when you see them, the first thing is what's going on in their head and why are they blocking it? And the second one is you're far better to make changes to your plan. One is that it's probably not the best plan anyway, because you've made it and your team. How can you change it so that it accommodates their personal agenda? And personal agenda, I don't think is a negative one. It's for your function, or it's for your government agency, or it's your area of your not-for-profit. But how do you make them win too? And if you can't make them win, it's going to fail anyway. And I always say the best change plan is the ones that leaders will support, which isn't necessarily the technically best plan, but it's one that everyone can sign up for. So step one is I check in to find out where they're at and what's going on. Two is I validate their position, because emotions run high, and people need to be validated. I hear you, I understand you. The resources would drain you, and you can't do that. I totally get it. And then the third thing would be, but what would have to be true so that this project would be successful on its own merits, and then in this case globally? And for you as a country lead, how could we do it so that you can further along? And then the bonus question I ask is, and what else can we add that will help the other aspects of your role that have nothing to do with this, but if I can put them into this project, then it's even better for you. And I found that philosophy works almost every time if there is a way to make the connection. So just
Mm.
in summary, the blocker will always block until there's no reason for them to block. So find out what the reason is. You change, not expect them to change, and you'll probably have a better outcome for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to bring people along and probably strengthen. Then you have also likely have an advocate as well, because they've been able to contribute in some way to the reshaping of the solution or the approach, whatever it might be. So everybody, as you're listening in, what questions are coming up for you, feel free to put them in the Q&A or in the chat. I will be keeping my eye on them, but I want to kind of dive into this a little bit, because I've sort of felt that, and now this is coming from somebody who was always told that I was a natural born salesperson, resisted the word sales for the first part of my career, and then finally decided to embrace it. And I think what I've really realized over my career, certainly, is that influence, persuasion, especially as we get flatter, things are more interconnected. It is such a key skill for leaders anywhere. In the book, you talk a lot about ways to influence and persuade and bring people on board around a change initiative. I get the kind of bringing the blockers along, but talk to us a little bit about what you think people often underestimate when it comes to selling their change idea or their change initiative. Are there some, things that repeatedly people make mistakes around, or, that people should really be thinking about as they're trying to influence and persuade other people? Because you're not going to be able to please everybody. Like, you could have 3 blockers with 3 different opinions, and at some point we got to do it this way. So give us a bit of a window into how you go about doing that.
Yes, what I find is that a lot of people, and I've done that as well, is what they don't realize is when you work on an initiative or project, or you're selling something, and nowadays with our project-based sort of work, it's typically influence without power. People
Mhm.
don't have to align with you, and
Mhm.
they may not. And what I found is that a lot of people, including me, is they fall in love with their idea, and they don't realize that people don't have that love, and they might not,
Don't love
it's
your
kind of like
baby
a,
as much as you love your baby.
I know it's an unrequired, and isn't she adorable? And she is. But if you notice people with their pitches or their presentations,
Mm.
a lot of the enthusiasm is, isn't this great? And what about this? And isn't this great? And it dices too, and it's great. And it's all built around your belief that this is the best thing in the world. And I found that that's not realistic as well. And another thing I find is, okay, so you're going down that track and you're selling, 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 selling. And it tends to be one way, like, let me tell you this and let me tell you that. And maybe if I don't breathe, I can get in another feature or a benefit. And what I believe to be true, and what I'd suggest to people who are watching, is co-creation is the best sales pitch you could ever do, because it's not a sales pitch. It's an alignment of benefits that everyone are going to get. So now what I do is, if I'm working on a large change and I create a first draft, I invite people to blow it up, because again, you've got, and blowing up my baby is going to make it better. And then you get a really different dialogue. It's not the presenter up there trying to sell you to take on something that you want.
Mm.
It's a creative process. And I think if you can engage that, well, I don't like this because we can't launch this in June because we're doing something else. And you go, great. When could we launch it for you? We'll launch it in May. Great. And all of a sudden you've got this dynamic of collaboration. And what I find, if you do it well, people kind of forget where they're at, and you do get that sense of, hey, this is it. And their fingerprints are all over it. And then all of a sudden we've created something great. So that would be my recommendation, that you're not selling, you're almost creating an environment where you've kicked it off, but we're creating something together.
Hmm. I love that co-creation. And I would think too, that really helps, if I love, your example earlier about the thing that you needed to work on was sort of taking feedback. When we've co-created something, we all own it. And it's not a personal thing against me if you don't like the direction, because we're all kind of in this together. So I could kind of see almost multiple benefits depending on what you're struggling with, I guess, as a change leader.
No, so true, Glenn. And I think the people assume that when you're up and you're presenting, there is going to be some sort of a tension if the questions are going to lead to some sense of, well, no, you're wrong, or let me show you the facts. And if you can almost, so much of our interactions, I find, and especially in hyper change, is the perception of intent. If someone thinks that, I really want to know what they think, and if they can trust me that much, that I'll digest and really think about what they have, and be open to changing things, then I'm not maybe holding back on one of my tough questions, because it's going to be, it's going to signal me out in front of the leader, but we're going to have a dialogue about it. So the faster I can demonstrate that, one, it's not perfect what I'm showing, and
Mhm.
two, that I love the fact that you're making it better, I think then you create an environment where people will not hold back at all and be brutally honest. But if the intent is to make it better and we're all trying to win, it's probably going to be a great conversation. I'm not going to be going, okay, what can I throw at, what spear can I throw at them next, because they're attacking me, which typically is not the case, but often we think it is.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. So great. And it sort of, kind of builds this sort of snowballs to me into the next sort of phase of, which is really like bringing other people, managing other people through the process. And one of the things that, really did strike me, when you're the person who's initiating a change and you brought everybody along, then at some point, other people have to lead the change. You are not the person who can, be everywhere doing it all the time, right? So how do you really build that army of leaders who are going to then take out your change and roll it through? Are there certain kind of key things you need to think about and get in place for pushing the change then down through into the organization?
No, thanks for asking the question. It's so important, because you can't do it by yourself, and especially
Mhm.
in large organizations, or if they're geographically dispersed. You can't be everywhere at the same time. And so what I find is sort of building, a champion network or a group of
Mm,
people, across the organization, whether it's different functions or departments or different geographies, anybody, anywhere where the change is being and impacting people, if everyone has a representative, and you're really sharing that leadership, and what you are really doing is you're creating leadership roles dispersed across your organization. And
mm,
so what do you need to help people is one is give them the information and knowledge about what you're trying to accomplish, being really clear about the role. And I find that the best organizations that do it, they share all the information with these individuals that are the point people for the change. They give them ample opportunity to ask questions. It's very much of a two-way.
mhm,
They're shaping it for their own particular, because they're the translator to their own group of what it means for them. But they're also the conduit for feedback to say, hey, it's not working in Wisconsin, or, something is wrong in the
mm,
Maritimes. And I think that's so important because, and it is a leadership role. And I think if you do that, so they have all the tools they need, you've identified that they are leaders and you've presented this as a leadership role, and you support them and take the feedback that they get, then you've kicked it off well. But one thing I think that's more important once you've established it is acknowledging and rewarding people for the work they do. And often in large change
mhm,
initiatives, I find resources are scarce. There's 8 changes at the same time. It seems like there's not a lot of time for rewarding and acknowledging because you're running to the next thing. And I get it. And we all do that. We just rush to the next thing on our list. But again, if we pause, there's so much power, Glenn, in pausing and thinking, what do we need to be doing now? But, and I always find that, especially like even from the day from that, seeing the woman who was struggling through the change that she was going through with the handheld, how people take change is and how you can read how they're feeling is what they tell their loved ones around the kitchen table at night. And
mhm,
it really is. It's where I'm struggling and I don't know if I'm going to make it, or I'm going to survive this uncertainty, or I'm a hero. And, the leader just said that, because of the work I did, we're further ahead than we would have been. And I think if you can empathize with the reality of going through change and how people define their success,
mm,
typically with loved ones. So what I'd always suggest is with that group, there's lots of time for acknowledgement and it's almost like giving a compliment. Hey, you look great today, but being really specific about where the compliment is coming from. And,
mm,
Glenn, because you were able to take the questions with your group and people were getting quite resistant, you position it in a way that they could understand it to see the long-term benefit, even though the short term is going to be tough for a while. And therefore they were on board. I couldn't have done it myself centrally, and you did it. So thank you so much. And I just want to share with your peers that these are the types of things that make a great leader during change. And I think if you can do things like that, it only takes a second, but it's a lifetime of recognition.
Yeah, you know what? I think what you're hitting on here is whether you're change or just life in general. We we will stew about having to give constructive feedback. We will think it over. We will talk to 10 people about how to go and have the conversation. And then when somebody's doing something great, we just toss off like, "Oh, great job." Right? There's no context around it. And I can totally imagine as you're going through a change initiative, and especially if it's a big one where there's lots of pieces and we still have a big long to-do list, right? Easy to lose track of how far we've come, and keeping that momentum going and appreciating people for their efforts and making sure that we're keeping that energy going in the right place, because I think we generally are bad at that. We're so critical, right, in organizations. We're always talking about what do we have to do next, and I think this notion of celebrating success is one that's very underutilized.
No, I agree, especially when we're under the strain of hyper change like now. And it is
Mm.
that fight, flight, or freeze sort of condition that uh, the reptile brain that just gets us into the do mode, and we're just going to keep going, and it's all about survival. And I think if we can't manage that or move beyond it, we're definitely not great managers or individual contributors. So how do we rise above our own personal fear, to do that. And that's one of the traits of a great leader. Not easy, as we know, but
Mm,
so important.
mhm. So one of the things I always love is I like to call it a good train wreck. I always love to know, like, what's the worst story and what are, what are the pitfalls you absolutely have to avoid. And so I'm curious, and all the change projects you've been involved in have led, da, da, da. What could you share with us? A really good train wreck story. If you ever do anything, do not do this. What what could you give us as a group? And we're in a safe environment. We're all
I, I see.
here.
Glenn, is it okay if I cry? Is that okay if I show my emotion?
I'll hand you the imaginary.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, the big one, and I think we always have a big one of in our personal lives, the worst story. And for me, it was and thanks for the transportation analogy. It was you're on the bus or off the bus. And, I was working in Canada and there was, uh, the organization wasn't doing well. The leader had been let go and sort of a regional person was coming in, and his philosophy was, if you can't take it, get out. And if you don't like me, get out. And everything was get out. Like you're talking, day two, the plant stopped being watered because, if you're on the bus, if you think you need to water your plant, you don't want to do it yourself, get out. And I learned so much from that time, because what it did is it was so confrontational, and people are not at their best in conference.
Yeah.
But it was a master class on not how to do it, and how to do command and control that we know that does not work well. So the first meeting, he kind of kicked off by saying, everyone's a louse. But I'm here to save the day, and you're probably don't want to ask the tough questions. So I've written them all down. I'm going to answer them for you. And like bam, bam, bam. And I bought this big mallet so I could hit everyone over the head every day. And it was like that. And what happens is that, me included, and then I was the HR connection. So I was well, thank you very much. That's really motivating. And I got a mallet too, and I'm going to hit my own head so I can help you. But what I realized is that it put everyone in a threatening spot. And
Mm,
what happened is at least 50% of their efforts were spent on protecting themselves. You had the 100-page PowerPoint decks just in case a question came up that had, my new question, but I'm going to have it in. So my pre-read, you're going to have to wheel it in on a cart. I'm not going to ask tough questions. I'm only going to do what I have to do because I'm going to protect myself. I'm even going to be a little bit distrustful of people that I normally would trust because, someone's got to get hit over the head and I don't want it to be me.
mm,
And it failed miserably, as you can imagine. People just, and you know what happened, Glenn? And this is where the emotion is. So I might need a tissue. But what happened is that people got so self-focused is they lost the culture of the organization, which was amazing, collaborative culture. And they passed the point of no return to say, I'm looking out for number one. And when these patterns happen, they become grained over time.
mm,
So what happened is that everyone watched the train wreck. And they were on it, but they were watching it, and they could have said something, they didn't. They could have done this, they didn't. They could have been their best, they weren't. And it failed miserably. And I think my lesson from that too is it failed quickly within months because the whole place just seized up. So that would be it. So what's the positive shine on that? And the positive shine is that you are creating an environment where people can be their best. They can test and learn and fail and learn from it if they're willing to do so to
mm,
get the best results. Co-creation is so important. All the things we've talked about today can be true if you empower people and want to learn together to find the best results. So that would be the one. And from someone who had the plant that was dying and got hit on the head a couple of times, I've never missed that lesson. And if I see signs with a client, a leader doing it, I intervene immediately because I know where it leads you. So thanks for the thanks for the session. I feel better.
The therapy session.
But
Reliving
whenever you
that
start
trauma.
saying, yeah, and sometimes it happens in less extreme ways. You're on a team and you're working on it, and someone is resisting. And I always hear someone say, "Well, they're a bad egg. Well, if they're not going to like it, they better, you know." And it's not as extreme, but the intent is the same. And I think that's a watch out for all of us. Once we start doing that, then it's the I'm going to hit you over the head, or I'm forging my own mallet, and you're destined for failure if you do. So turn the page and start over again.
I think it's a really good, I think a lot of us do that in ways that we don't even recognize that we do it, right? Because I think you can be well-intentioned and you can say to people, I have to monitor it with myself all the time with my business. I have my programs, I like the way they run. And so when I have new people that come in and say, what about this? What about that? There's a part of me, and often I would like to say every time I catch myself and I'm open-minded and I want to listen, but probably if you talk to some of my colleagues, they would say, yeah, she's kind of like stuck on that. Right. And then I always think, am I getting then the best ideas from the people on my team because of my own needing to control or needing to, or I've fallen in love with my baby and nobody understands my baby the way I understand my baby. So, I think we can all be change resistant when we're as leaders trying to demonstrate that we're open-minded and collaborative and we want everybody's input. It's really
So,
interesting.
so true. And something that might help, and I've been trying to do this now, especially, and again, there's no perfect, but if we keep practicing, we get a little bit closer to being our best. What I try to do now is I try to, when, again, it could be criticism or it's my baby, all those things you mentioned, Glenn. What I try to do is I put in the phrase, tell me more, instead of yes but, which would have been my default. Yes, but did I show you how shiny my
Yeah.
thing was when I created it 8 years ago? But it just it gets me over that initial either defensiveness or exuberation for something I think is great. But it helps me get past that little hump that I hit a lot.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely do. I have certain energy around winning and controlling that is great when it's great and it's terrible when it's
Oh,
terrible.
I know. I
Um,
know.
so we've got a couple of questions that have come in. So Solly is asking, what do you suggest to overcome stakeholders' fear and resistance? What do you suggest to
No, that's great.
overcome stakeholders' fear and resistance? What do you got?
That's great. And first of all, would it be okay if everyone that puts a question in the chat, could they get a free book? Would that be okay?
You know what? That's a great idea.
Let's do it. Okay.
Yeah,
Done. Well, okay.
done.
Yay.
I love it. Yes,
Excellent.
if you
Thank
put a
you.
question, so there you go. We've got a
Well,
couple of people that are going to get Phil's newest book. Love
oh, fantastic. Thank you, Glenn. And thank you for the questions. And
it.
how do you overcome it? And I find that's great. And the question that I ask myself when I hear yours is there's so many different stakeholders and they all are individuals. And how do you overcome them? The first thing is really to understand what it is. And often I find when people say what they're resisting or what they're not telling you the full story. They're only giving you part of it. And you almost need a trust, kind of some sort of a light trust connection where people will really be honest, because they can say, well, it's never been invented here, or that's a bad time. Usually I find that's not the real reason. That's the company reason, or that's the fact reason. So the first one is as I would suggest is trying to meet with that person if they have a fear or they're concerned or whatever, and trying to establish that that communion of I really want to know what it is. The second and again, it took me years and years and years to realize this. What I would do is I go, great, I've got the facts. I'm going to come up with a great, solution for your problem about why you are afraid and or what your objection is. And I think that goes against everything we've been talking about today about co-creation. What
Yeah.
I ask now is, well, what would work for you?
Mm.
And it's almost always not what I would have thought, because we're creatures of assumptions, and I do that all the time. I got the answer, I finished the puzzle, I hit the buzzer, And that doesn't work well when you're trying to help people to change. And it might be something really small, but it's just what they needed. Or it could be, I really don't want to be a sponsor of this change. And, well, why? Because, well, I'm really too busy. Well, maybe
Mm,
public speaking is an issue, and they say, well,
right.
I really don't want to be up and doing a Q&A or ask me anything. Okay, great. Well, what would work for you? Well, maybe, submitting questions in B4. So that was one. Understand what it really is. And the
Mm,
second one is ask them what would help. And then the third one is, if you can't do exactly that, then you start brainstorming what would work for them. And then the last one, and this is such an important thing, follow through,
mm.
because it's so easy to have these meetings and get busy. But then that is scratched on my notepad. And that night, I make sure I do it, because that's all part of building trust too. So thanks so much for the question. I hope it helps.
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so another question that came in, and I am going to really, and with a name like Glein, I should be much better at names. So I'm going to apologize up front. So I'm going to say Omolad. Maybe it's Omolade. I'm not sure. But question is, how do you keep on working with an insecure boss that gets on your nerves daily? I wonder if that's actually Shelby on my team disguised
Yeah,
as something else.
well,
Anyway,
actually, Shelby did contact me last night, so I'll answer Shelby's question.
there we
Oh
go.
boy, yeah, and the thing is, that's such a power pack question. So thank you so much. And the thing is, what my first question is, really understand why it's annoying you, because we all have bosses that annoy you and whatever, but what is it? And sometimes I find when I'm annoyed with a boss or whatever, it's sort of like, hey, you should be doing this because I can do this, and you're the leader and you should be doing it. That's only one of the examples. And so what's going on with me, and what's triggering my emotion? Because if I can figure that out, maybe the question isn't how do I make them secure and confident, but how do I neutralize the fact that they're ticking me off? And that might leave you in a more positive space. And maybe, it's the fact that they delegate everything to you because that involves a decision, because they're insecure and they don't want to make it themselves. Whatever it is, what's bugging you, and try to solve that. And then the second thing is, if the insecurity is really bugging you, there's so many ways to build up someone so that they feel less insecure. And, so from really reminding them about their strengths, reminding them of times that they have done this before, giving them the key messages, because whenever they're up and, they get nervous and they start babbling, whatever it is, perhaps there's a solve to make them a little less so. But I think it starts with ourselves. And then from there, I think that leads to a sort of a better outcome. So they're not bugging you so much.
Yeah, I always love the whole notion. It was Deepak Chopra. I did a thing with him once, and he said, write down the 5 things that you admire. Think of somebody that you admire and think about the 5 qualities you admire about that person. Now think about the person that drives you crazy and write down the 5 qualities. And then he said, congratulations, you've just written about yourself. And that traumatized me for days. Fortunately, I'm married to a psychotherapist, so I can say, okay, what does this mean about myself, right? But it is about really like self-compassion, right? So
Yes.
treating yourself with compassion, but also I always think, what in this situation do I own that I can control? Because I can't wave a magic wand and change you, but how can I change my reaction to it? So great. Thanks, Phil. And hopefully
My
that
pleasure.
helps a little bit. We've got a couple more questions that I want to get to here. So Ivy asks, how do you help organizations transition and evolve their culture when trust has been eroded from previous poor leadership?
Wow, that's a $1 million question, and it happens so much in organizations, and the reason why is that people, their perspective of change in an organization is based on how well it went in the past. So if the last change was great and people felt great about it, the leader comes up and says, we're changing again. Wow, I'm up for it. If it was a total disaster, and then it's like, hey, we're going to change again. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm going to go into the dark cave again. And, it's got 18 months of pain and sorrow, and they're not going to support you. So what I would recommend is, it was not you, but I mean the organization, the leaders, it was disaster. So the only way to get around that, you can't go, oh wow, this is going to be great, because people are smart and they know, hey, we're on. I'm assuming we're going to go down the same path. First thing is to call it. And I worked with one government agency, and they had a dismal, their words, dismal, track record on change. So the leader went up and said, that we failed. And this is why I think we've failed. And now we're going to break out into groups and we're going to talk about why we failed and what we can do to flip it so it will be different this time. So one is hey, they are serious about doing different things, to the co-creation to make it happen. So honesty, I think, is the best first step to do it. If you don't do that, I've never seen it go well, because people go, oh yeah, that's great, but internally they know it's not going to go great, and we're putting another mask on it to do it. What has to be different now is a great positioning for that leadership team or the project team or the broader group, because if you do the same thing, you'll get the same. And then also, how can we get people involved? Because that's usually when change doesn't go too well.
Mm.
People weren't, the system didn't include what people really needed to do, and, get more people involved as well. And the thing is, the naysayer that said we really sucked last time, if she or he is on it now and they're putting their good ideas up, they quickly forget because they feel that they have some sort of control. So great question. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a great question. Okay, we've got a few more that are coming in. The book incentive is doing its job, Bill. So let's see if we can get through that. I'm going to go through these last, hopefully 3. So let's go.
Okay, I'll be really quick.
All right. Jen Park says, do you have any tips on how to lead and bring people along for changes that are being done much, much more quickly than usual due to the need to pivot very quickly in COVID-19?
Yes, because now we're speeding up the machine and making it happen. What I would do is I would double the amount of communication behind it, and a lot of the why, because usually people need 3 things. They need, what are we going to do? So where are we going? Why is it important? And the third one is, what is my role? So how am I going to contribute? What do you need to do, and why is it important to do it? The blind spots of most organizations are 2 and 3. But in COVID times, and we have to go fast right now, I would really, really, really triple down on the third one. This is what we need you to do. This is why it's important. And this is how we're going to be measuring that you're doing it. And what help do you need to do that? And so you make it individual focused versus team focused, and check in. And I think you'll be far further ahead than the normal times where, we have more time and more connectivity.
Nice. All right. And then Amy says, in many large scale organizational changes, there isn't an opportunity to bring all leaders in to provide feedback before the change moves forward. Is there a way to still get leaders to feel involved versus told?
Yes, that's so true. And what I would say is, I would say what has to be true so that they can have some sort of feedback. Because I've never seen a group where they're just told, or the worst case is the manager and the person that reports into them are told at the same time, so that the manager's embarrassed because she or he didn't have that. Oh, and they can't support it, and you just boot it. But what you can do is, what type of feedback you ask of them. So what I would say is, if you're caught in a jam, you have no time to do it, what I would do is ask them one question. Is there anything that will not work in your area? Because it's absolutely important that, it executes well to make you successful. So it's exception reporting. That's an email, that's a phone call, that's a Zoom call. You can do that, and it doesn't take much time. And, within one intervention of doing it, you have got the feedback. And then the real, cherry on the top is, follow what they say, or if you can't, give them a really good business reason why not, because they'll be watching when did you do it or not? If you did it, they're on board.
Nice. And last question, because then we're going to have to wrap it up, is from Nicola. And she says, what are some coping strategies when working with leaders who consistently change priorities and expectations?
Right. And again, another great one. And there's some leaders that will keep flipping, and that's the priority. The challenge that I find when I'm in that circumstance is that I've been working so hard here, and then, no, I've got to kind of go over to this garden and work over there, and then go over to that garden. What I would do is it's almost a sanity play. Is, if you know that they're flipping all over the place, what I would do is go with that energy, because I don't think you're going to make them prioritizers, because they've done this forever. I think it's a better strategy to manage them and to say, leader, I know that we're changing our priorities because, we have different stakeholders and we have to do, I totally get it. But what I'm finding is that if I don't understand how priorities have changed, or if your expectations of me are the same, but our priorities are changing, it seems misaligned and it's not enabling me to be my best. So could we have a signal, or could you let me know once a week, we're going to go over my top 3 priorities and let me know how the order is changing, and then I'll change as I'm doing it. And then what I would do is, because we're leading up to a performance management as well, I would document that in a chart to show how haphazard and how volatile that is. And the fact that you did have, I had 25, short starts, and then I had to do something else. And because then you're nailing what the environment you're working on and how you reacted to it, which is a strength, instead of being blown around like we all are when leaders change so quickly. So go with the energy. You won't change them overnight, but create an environment where you will be successful in the fray.
Beautiful. I feel like we could keep going all day. In the interest of
I
time,
wish we could.
I am going to do our wrap up. But Phil, thank you so much. Those of you who ask questions, we will be grabbing them through the chat, and we will make sure we'll reach out to all of you to get your addresses and get those over to Phil so that he can send you hot off the press the copy of his book. So Shelby, if you want to kind of flip up our closing slide. So those of you who don't know us much or don't know much about us, we are the Roundtable. We help leaders navigate change, disruption, and growth. And we do it through group coaching, team coaching, and mentoring programs. And we have our signature program. We only offer it open enrollment twice a year for senior manager, director level cohort this spring. So if you have somebody, or you are somebody who is ambitious and driven, it's really got no boundaries anymore. We're doing it all virtually. So it doesn't matter where you're located, you can get in on this program. If you want more information, feel free to reach out to myself or Shelby. And of course, you can buy my book, Grassroots Leadership Revolution, start your own, peer coaching group. And then just to let you know, there's Bookotis here. Yeah, we should hold up our books together. And so for next month, or in 2 weeks, I should say, I am going to be joined by my friend, Kara Keating, who is the president of PepsiCo Foods Canada. If you want to hear what it was like to step into this top job and then 7 months later be hit by a pandemic, she has got some great stories to share, and it's going to be a terrific view from the C-suite event. So thank you all so much for being with us today. Thank you, Phil, for your time and expertise.
Pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Enjoy the rest of the week, everybody. Stay safe.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.